Thank you to all the witnesses for taking the time to join us today. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Ross. You were asked by my colleague from the Bloc Québécois, Monsieur Fortin, and also by our chair, Mr. Miller, about the religious defense, to use that term, embedded in Section 319 of the Criminal Code. And just to confirm, you are against any removal of this defense from the hate provisions of the Criminal Code, correct?
Yes, that's correct, precisely because they've been important in upholding the regime as constitutional.
We have seen in a number of debates in society, sometimes public opinion shift. We've seen what is at one point in time held by society change, sometimes in 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years. We need to be able to have discussions on contentious issues to do that. One example that has come up in this committee's hearing last week on this was the way that we're discussing gender right now and sexual identity. And one of our previous witnesses said that they could actually see a case in which C9, with the lower threshold for what constitutes hate, could lead to criminal charges against someone for going against whatever the liberal orthodoxy is on gender. Would you agree with that concern?
Well, I think that is a concern whether it's on that particular issue or on any number of social issues where Canadians hold very sincere, strongly held views. If we define hatred too imprecisely, then it does create the risk that it could be used or employed to capture not just the speech or the modes of expression that the Supreme Court has been concerned with, but specific ideas that we might find repugnant or offensive, and used to apply hatred in a colloquial sense as opposed to in a criminal sense to speech that is part of what it means to be in a democratic society, to be opposed to to be exposed to opposing views.
There have been, since 2021, at least 123 churches in Canada that have been either burned or vandalized. This has been something that the former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said was, quote, fully understandable. His principal secretary, Gerald Butt, said it was understandable. That's a direct quote. What's your view on the way that we view hate in this country somewhat selectively?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think it's really important that when we talk about this legislation, that we want to ensure that the criminal code works to protect all communities, all religious communities in Canada. And that's what the Charter requires, is that every group, every faith group is entitled to the full and equal protection of the law. And so it shouldn't, and we don't want to make this about my group versus your group. It's about ensuring that every group has the same protection. And so thank you, Mr. Lawton, for raising attention about some of the very profound concerns that we and many others have about the number of churches that have been burned to the ground in Canada. We are equally concerned about attacks and vandalism directed at synagogues and mosques. This is an issue that we all recognize is a problem in our country. That's why we're here. And so this isn't something that we want to ignore. The question is, what's the best way to address it? And that's what we speak to in our written brief.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Mr. McSorley, you alluded to flaws that you see in the terror listing process. I just want to understand where you're coming from on this a little bit more clearly. Do you view what happened on October 7th as a terrorist attack?
It was committed by a illicit terrorist organization, and we denounced very vocally any attack on civilians, and have spoken out that there should be an immediate ceasefire.
Do you personally view it as a terrorist attack?
I believe it as an attack on civilians that can't be justified, and that should be, viewed as being a grave concern. But that we've also seen retaliation that's been outmeasured to the violence on that particular day.
The moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel is interesting in your answer. Do you personally believe Hamas belongs on the terror list in Canada?
I don't have a personal opinion about which organizations should be on the terrorist listing. Our position as a coalition, and that's who I'm here to speak on behalf of today, is that the terrorist entities listing is a flawed process.
Will you denounce Hamas right now as a terrorist organization, yes or no?
It's listed as a terrorist organization, and that's what I'm here to speak on behalf of my organization and our coalition. I'm not here to speak on behalf and say yes or no if the government is wrong for its determination, but rather that the listing itself is a problematic process.
Thank you, Mr. McSorley.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McSorley, would you agree that the definition of hatred as written in Bill C-9 were to be adopted as law, that the government or politically or ideologically motivated groups could act in a way that abuses the intent of the law?
I have to be clear. So our coalition, our organization, it does not, our expertise isn't on the definition of hate, but we do agree with those such as the Canadian Civil Liberties Association that have raised concerns, and others have raised concerns about whether or not the definition currently in Bill C-9 is extensive enough.
By choosing to define hatred as the government has, what, in your estimation, would be the difference between the terms disdain or dislike or disdain?
Again, I have to say that our coalition, I have to be specific because the organizations that I represent have given me a specific mandate on what to speak about. But I can say that, as we've seen with others, they would have concerns with that answer.
Mr. Ross, should the government in Bill C-9 adopt the definition of hatred as set out in the Supreme Court of Canada decision R versus Keegstra, so that the law may be evenly applied and is tightly protected from the abuse for political or ideological reasons?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And our written brief, and I don't know if it's been circulated yet, speaks specifically to this issue and the need for clarity in the definition of hatred. And I appreciate that the government has been very clear that the intent for this definition of hatred is to codify the established test established by the Supreme Court in cases like Keegstra and Whatcott. And we would support that. We would like to see, though, that that definition is incorporated holistically. We're concerned that a number of important parameters have been omitted. We were encouraged, though, to hear the minister invite proposed amendments to address that. And that is what we've done in our brief. And there's 3 specific prescriptions that the Supreme Court set out in Whatcott that we think need to be made explicit in the bill. And I can just very quickly identify those 3 prescriptions. The first is that hatred must be assessed objectively. So hatred is not assessed based on whether the speaker thought it was hateful or whether a complainant thought it was hateful. Thank you very much. But based on whether a reasonable person aware of the context and circumstances would view the expression as exposing a protected group to enmity and extreme ill will. So it needs to be objective. Second, the term hatred is limited to extreme manifestations. Those 2 words, extreme and manifestations, are both important and need to be added. And third, the hate speech legislation, the court said, is not to target the content of ideas, as repugnant as one might think they are, but the ways that they're expressed and the effects that they might have. So the goal is not to censor ideas or compel anyone to think, quote unquote, correctly, but to determine the likely effect of the expression on an audience. Our amendments address all 3 of those prescriptions.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. And sorry to rush you, just my time is so limited. If this bill is adopted with the definition of hatred as written, will it not just end up back in the Supreme Court to relitigate an already dealt with concern? Are we kicking the can down the road?
I think that's a very real concern, that unless these amendments are included, unless these concerns are addressed, there is a constitutional vulnerability and certainly a vulnerability to constitutional challenge.
The point in saying that this is that, there is a clear subjective element in evaluating and determining what is stronger, that disdain or dislike. Therefore, would you not agree that removing the subjective language in the definition would strengthen this bill and protect Canadians' fundamental freedoms?
Yes, precisely. That's why we recommend a clarifying clause to ensure that it's clear, not just to the courts, but to those that are interpreting and trying to apply this on the ground. What do we mean? What meets the threshold of hatred? And in our brief, it's on page 3, we propose adding language that says that for the purpose of determining hatred, the court must consider, in the view of a reasonable person aware of the context and circumstances, whether the activity in question exposes or tends to expose members of an identifiable group to enmity and extreme ill will, or seeks to abuse, denigrate, or delegitimize them to render them dangerous or unworthy in the eyes of the audience. That language is drawn directly from the Supreme Court, and we think that clarification is important and helpful.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Lieutenant.
I just want to. I think it's been some excellent testimony as to some of the weaknesses of the bill, and I think it's been constructive. So I just wanted to take the conversation though a little bit back, more general. So, a quick but I think important question for the witnesses: do any of you know how the Charter of Rights and Freedoms begins?
If you're referring to,
Sorry.
are you referring to the? Sorry to interrupt you. If you're referring to the preamble,
You referred to the preamble, although it's actually a part of the Charter. It's not actually a preamble.
so the opening words of the Charter state that whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, and then Section 1 states that the rights and freedoms are guaranteed subject to such limits. I should have this memorized as
But I wanted to get it
justified
across.
in a free and democratic society.
Yes, and so I just wanted to ask all of the panelists, we'll just use the three major books, or three of the major, shouldn't say the three major, but three of the major books of religions: the Quran, the Bible, both New and Old Testament, and the Torah, which of course is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Do you believe that any Canadian should ever be criminalized for reading any of these scriptures? And we'll go right across. So start with you, Mr. Ross.
No, there should not be a categorical criminalization of simply reading a religious text. As I hope I made clear in my previous answers, sometimes the context of the way that a text is used, or more accurately misused, that might merit criminal intervention. But to say categorically that reading a particular text, whether it's a religious text or any other text, I think it's problematic if we start listing certain books as being off limits.
Deputy Chief.
Yeah, I agree. I think no. I mean, reading is one thing. I think it's the context it's being read in, and the space it's being utilized in. I think is something you need to be mindful of, right? Anyone can read what they want and choose to read what they want and believe in what they want to believe in. It's a matter of how you're utilizing that, whether in a space amongst your peers or your friends, or in a space where there's others who might have some concern with that. So I think that the context is very important around the use of that.
So, but Deputy Chief, if in fact you're reading the Torah, the Quran, or the Bible in a large group, you might see a potential for criminalization.
No, again, that's I think far-reaching a little bit. I think it just depends on the context of what your intentions are with it. I mean, you could get into good debate about the use of that and when it's used, but to read it, I think we could read lots of things that people might find offensive, right? So I think it's just there's a context that you have to take this all in when you look at what the intent of that was.
The same question for you.
Thank you. Yes, and I'd agree with the two other speakers that certainly there should be no law that simply outright bans the reading of any religious text in Canada, and that the context of how speech is delivered is what is important. And if it goes into calling for violence or other similar instances, then certainly that needs to be addressed. But the simple reading of a religious scripture should not be criminalized.
Mr. McSorley.
Mr. Lawrence,
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're very
Thank you very much. Mr. McSorley, when we were speaking earlier, I was hoping I'd be able to dispatch with my questions very shortly, but evidently this is going to take a little bit more time here. You identified in your testimony a key concern you had with the provision of C9 dealing with hate symbols to be what you termed a flawed process in listing terrorist entities. So if you believe the process is flawed, do I take from it that you believe there are people on the list of terrorist entities that do not belong there?
That's a good question. We believe that the process is flawed. We haven't, our role, and we have not reviewed every single entity that's on the terrorist entities list to determine whether or not they should be there. One example I could give is that the FARC in Colombia was previously a revolutionary force engaged in violent activities, is now part of a peace process, and yet remains listed on the terrorist entities list. And so we think that's part of the flaw in the fact that it's difficult for organizations to challenge it because it's done in, the evidence is kept secret and the decision-making process itself is secretive. We think that administrative listing processes are the problem. The government can determine whether or not there should be sanctions against certain organizations for the activities they undertake, including organizations they deem to be terrorist organizations. But we are deeply concerned around how the listing process itself works.
Do you believe that ISIS belongs on the list?
Again, they've engaged in terrorist activities. They engage in violence. We believe that the government is right to set sanctions. We don't believe in the actual listing process as being an effective tool.
Do you believe Al-Qaeda belongs on the list?
Again, the same answer. These are terrorist organizations that engage in violence and should be sanctioned. We have problems with the listing itself.
Thank you. You just acknowledged that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are terrorist organizations. How about Hamas?
Hamas has also engaged in activities that have been defined as terrorist activities. We believe that any act of political violence is problematic. The government has decided to determine that they are a terrorist organization, and we have problems with the actual listing itself.
So I'm just struggling to understand here where you would draw the line when we are talking about organizations that have committed in plain view acts of terror, that have as their charter a desire to eradicate the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And I have, anyone who's watched my work on this committee knows that I'm a very firm believer in freedom of expression. I've been very critical of Bill C-9 for, I believe, infringing on that. But if we are not able to have a conversation that calls terrorists terrorists, I don't see how we're going to be able to deal with some of the bigger questions facing this committee and facing society. So this is a very simple question. Do you believe October 7th was a terrorist attack? Not how governments view it, not how the Canadian government is viewing it. Do you believe it is a terrorist attack?
I believe that it was an act that would fall under the definition of terrorism. It was a terrorist activity, but we have problems with how the government views how Hamas or any organization is placed on the list, and that the listing process itself is a problem. And that the definition overall that simplifies the idea of what's considered terrorism leads to discrimination and leads to the tarring of entire communities engaged in protest, for example, against human rights abuses as being linked to a terrorist organization.
Do you believe that if someone were to gather in a Canadian street and say we should have another October 7th, would that be an incitement to violence? Would that be something that you believe should be criminal?
A call to the reenact to again engage in a violent activity is clearly a call to violence, and it would be criminalized.
I'm glad we got eventually to your position that this was terrorism. Thank you very much, Mr. McSorley. Just in the limited time I have left, I'd like to ask you a question or two, Deputy Chief, because we have seen the definitional changes in C-9. Are there hate charges that the Edmonton Police, or potential hate charges that the Edmonton Police Service has not laid in the last year, 2 years that you're aware of that would be laid if C-9 had been in place?
I would probably say yes, that there probably would be, and I think part of the problem is that we've gone with mischief charges because there wasn't an actual charge for that space, for that particular charge. So I think that's where we're going to see some of those mischief charges coming up, because we would have felt that we could have advanced with the hate crimes charge, and it just didn't exist with that definition.
There was in a community in my riding someone who was charged under 319 with hate, and their display had involved a swastika mowed into their lawn. Do you agree that hate symbols can be a part of your investigation and your decision to lay a charge under the current hate laws?
I think they're considered. I just don't think it's as clear as we'd like it to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Chief. Thank you, Mr. Lawton.